Okay, everyone, welcome to this session with Dr. Michael Allen, who really needs no introduction. We can clap. Let's do it. Let's clap. Woohoo! I'm sure you all know, but I'll give the introduction anyway. Dr. Allen was pretty much the godfather of e-learning. He's the man that started all of this, with Authorware being the first e-learning authoring tool, with the books that he's written. If you took an instructional design class in college, you studied Dr. Allen. And we get to have him on stage with our very own Bill West, Executive Director of our eLearning Brothers Custom Company. And we're going to talk about the state of the e-learning industry. It's going to be phenomenal. You guys are going to love it. And as you can see here, we're going to give away some books that Dr. Allen will be signing. So get your business cards ready. Get them out. Stephanie over here will be collecting business cards. And so get those ready because we're going to do that. And then we're going to sign those books afterwards. As well, the book is in the bookstore. If you don't get chosen, you can still buy it and have Dr. Allen sign it. So with that much, we are going to bring on Dr. Allen and Bill West. Let's give them another hand.
Thanks.
Give you the 5-minute warning.
Oh, yeah, good idea. Good idea. Are you driving? Are we talking?
I am driving and you guys are talking.
You're driving. Okay, outstanding. Outstanding. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. You guys know this guy. I have followed his career and ran kind of in the background parallel. Did my first CBT course in 1988 when we had one color on the screen, and that was green, and you needed a mainframe behind the scenes to make it run. And we come a long way since then.
Yeah, a little ways.
You helped a lot?
Yeah,
a little bit?
Try it.
Yeah. So we'll spend a little bit of time with you, hopefully an open dialogue, talking about instructional design principles, talking a lot about what he's talking about in the new second edition of the book, which is really exciting. And I think we're doing the poll first.
We're doing the principles first.
Okay. So we're going to start off with the instructional design principles. Have a little bit of debate about that.
Okay. So, no, sorry. I thought that's right.
All right. So a lot has changed, as I mentioned. Mainframe computers back in the 80s, the Plato system back in the 70s, tablets, chisels, and hammers pretty much before that. So what we want to do is get, from your perspective, what's changed over the years? What's changed in terms of learning requires attention? So hands up, has it changed? The attention span, has it changed over the course of how long? 20 years? Sure. 20 years. All right, 20 years. Learning requires attention. Changed or not changed? Changed. Not changed. Not changed. Engagement is still required. Thoughts?
Yeah, so there's a lot of studies about this, and I got to tell you, I think one of the themes of my sharing things with you today is that there's so much misinformation out there. People are blogging and saying this is fact and so forth, with there no research underneath it. It's kind of like justifying what they're doing rather than sharing tools for you to use. And one of the things that is said so often is that the new generation has a very short attention span. That's not really right. All the studies on this topic have shown they have just as much attention span as anybody else did. What is the case is they are more demanding that you're not wasting their time. And if they're not finding anything useful from this, then they abort, as they should, in my opinion, right? So it's not that they can't pay attention, that they wouldn't stay involved. It's that they don't if it's not paying off. And so I think that's just wonderful news, because the thing about time is that it's non-refundable. So if you go to a course and you think, geez, that was a waste of time, there's no counter to go to and say, I'd like my time back, please, right? So those of us that are building learning experiences have an obligation to use everybody's time effectively. And when people go away, that's a pretty strong opinion and vote that says this wasn't good for me.
So you're saying they have the same amount of attention but less patience?
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now that's what research says. Now you'll find a lot of blogs and other people saying no, and here's how millennials are and so forth. Ask for the research.
Yeah. Well, and I had a client who said, it's nothing different than what we've been saying. There's just more millennials with a louder voice now, and people have to pay attention.
They do have a louder voice, and thank goodness. We get feedback. This really helps us up our game.
Outstanding. All right, next one. E-learning authors' knowledge of human learning. Changed? Not changed. Not sure. Changed. Changed. Good.
Yeah, not for the better. I think there's a lot more information out there to guide us than there's ever been before. But, and I don't mean this to be unkind in any way, and shoot me if you feel it's appropriate, but the field has been flooded by people who've been given the responsibility to develop training, as if it's something that anybody walking down the street can do, right? Well, there's a lot to know about it, and experience counts too, because you really need to work in the platform you're working on in order to create meaningful, memorable, motivational experiences. If you leave out an M, you're dead. So it's got to be meaningful, memorable, and motivational. And most people can't do that, at least not without some training, mentoring, study, and experience. So if you look at the whole of the body of people who are developing learning experiences, I think that the knowledge of the process has been diluted, actually, and that's not good for any of us.
Yeah. Andy Warhol said that anybody can be an artist, but very few people are. And I think probably instructional design practices could be the same way. All right, the effort to create appealing graphics changed?
Most people say yes.
Most people say yes? And yes.
And I agree with that. And in fact, lots of times you don't have to create anything. You just go over to Andrew's company right there and you just buy it, right? Andrew's looking away like, not me. But eLearning Brothers, has terrific resources there. And the whole question is, can you find it and buy it faster than you can create it? And sometimes, yes, for sure, and we ought to do that. And now the library is so much larger than it ever has been before that we really can find things that are precise fit rather than just good enough, right?
Valuing authoring time versus learning impact. You want to define what you mean by that one?
Is he saying you can't hear?
Can't hear him? Give him the mic. Give you the mic.
Okay, the mic is better? Okay, thanks. All right. What was the question? Oh, yeah, right. And did we do a vote already?
No, we didn't. We want you to
Now
define
this,
what it is.
now the sound is good, is it? It's like the volume dropped way down. Huh.
Can you hold it close?
I'll talk right. Oh, it's really sensitive. Okay. So, has this changed? The value we place on authoring time versus learning time, and I see nods, and I think it has. This is very unreliable, but what we see today is people so concerned about how long it takes to author something, when in fact, if you just whip something out, it could take learners 10, 20, 30% more time to have the same beneficial experience. If you multiply that times all the learners out there, which way are you wasting more time, right? So, in fact, we've got to get the notion across to people that if you want to save money, you need to put enough into the authoring and design and development process in order to make an efficient learning experience that will save you money, and it'll increase your productivity, and so all of the business measures can go up if your goal is not just to minimize how much time it takes for an author to develop a good learning experience.
Great. The need to practice for learning retention. I think we all kind of understand what this is. Has that changed or not changed? No. It has not changed. It's always been important, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's always been important. There's no sense in any of the research that the human organism has changed in any dramatic way. And the way we build skills is to practice, to do over again. One of the most important things is the opportunity to make mistakes and see the consequences of mistakes.
Targeting knowledge versus performance outcomes. Changed? Come on, Jack. Changed or not changed? Should change. Should change.
Yeah. So I think the bottom line is that no employers care what their employees know. They really don't care about that, except that a lot of times there's tests on it, and this is some sort of measure of success. But in fact, employers don't care what their employees know. They care about what they do. So we don't go into training just to make people feel guilty about doing the wrong thing. We do training to get them to do the right thing, right? Do the right thing at the right time. Success always comes from that.
Learning requires time and energy. Has that changed? Require more time and energy than it used to? Not changed.
No, it hasn't. And in just a minute, I'm going to talk about a set of research studies that really give us great guidance, I think. And one of the things that I think is, I'm so pleased to have the research on it, is that the more effort you put into learning, the more you learn and the more you retain it. So our job as instructional designers is not to minimize effort, it's to goad people into putting the effort in without their feeling like this is hard work, right? But you need to put the effort in or you don't learn very much.
Great.
Yep. Let's move to these 11 principles.
Oh, okay. Are you gonna, do you want me to do that?
Point, not a counterpoint.
Okay, so I think these are little gems, and I based much of what I put in the book based on this information, because I don't want to be yet one more of those people out there that's blogging and expounding on things that they believe to be true without any real evidence that they are true, right? So here are some really robust evidence-based principles that I think should guide our use of any technology. The technology doesn't matter, but these things really do matter. First of all, well, I was just talking about this one, right? That learning is deeper, it's more robust, it lasts longer when it requires effort. I think many authors and designers, instructional designers, are misguided by the notion that their job is to make learning easy. Actually, your job is to make learning kind of hard, but make it a pleasant, rewarding, beneficial experience, right? So use that time very, very effectively. And if we do, it's not just glossing over pages, just watching videos slide by that don't engage us, don't arouse emotions, don't get our minds thinking. It's to get people to actually do the work to learn, because you can't learn people, right? You can't learn people. They have to do the work themselves.
So tell me just 1 second. So everybody, the movement that everybody wants to talk about is micro-learning. So learning in little bitty chunks. So how does that contrast with the need to make it harder when everybody seems to want to make it easier?
All right, so that's actually kind of a complex question. Make it an easy one. Okay. So another principle is the importance of spacing learning, right? So little chunks spaced apart are much better than big chunks all in one block of time. Okay, so I think that's a major reason why microlearning makes sense and works, right? It does so sometimes make it more difficult to deal with complex processes and content, because you kind of need to work through more of that, right? You know, so the objective isn't to make it small. The objective is to make it effective. And you should make it small when it's effective, and you shouldn't chunk it up arbitrarily when it's not.
Yeah. One of the more effective programs I've seen in a while was a series of training programs. They used to spend 2 to 4 hour sessions to learn all this information, have some decent practice, and then hopefully apply it when it was necessary. What they did is they took it down, and every day for a 14-day period, you received a 5 to 10 minute chunk. So 5 to 10 minutes of really engaging content with some activities, and you got it every single day for a 14-day period, and it was threaded, of course, and one of the most effective programs I've ever seen. Good.
This is really interesting. In quite a few studies, you find out that people report that, boy, this was a really good course and I learned a lot. When measured objectively, you found out that they didn't learn a lot. It just felt like it. So we got to make sure that we aren't just making people happy and feel like it was effective for them when it's really not. Now, I hear in a lot of sessions and people reporting that a technique worked well because on a post-test these people scored this and the people who didn't use something scored lower. What we know is post-tests are almost meaningless. They just give you a short-term retention measure. But if you delay measures at least a couple weeks, 6 weeks is better, you'll start to get feedback that really helps and tells you which techniques worked and which didn't. It's a whole research area in and of itself. But if you just ask, some of you will know the work of Will Thalheimer, and I hope so. Yeah, the work to work. I got it right. Work to learn. Anyway, Will Thalheimer, he's studied a lot of things. He's put out a book recently on smile sheets and talked about how misleading smile sheets can be. And then techniques to make them effective. But it's really interesting that if you would go by what people tell you they like because this really works for me, there's a good chance that they're not telling the truth. It's not that that they're intentionally misleading, it's just that they don't know. And it's a very robust finding that people just don't know. Yeah, okay. So what did I do in graduate school and the rest of you have done in training is that we had a textbook of materials and I forced myself to read everything 3 times, right, to go over it multiple times. It turns out that I was wasting my time in terms of getting the maximum benefit. Rereading the stuff doesn't help a lot. There are other things that help a whole lot, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But this is one of the least productive things. So trying to force people to watch a video multiple times or read something multiple times thinking that this is really beneficial instructional experience is actually misguided.
So we'll get to the whole role of practice and failure and simulation and such, right? Oh, there we go.
There you go. You're looking to the future here. Yes, right. So retrieval practice is a lot better. So if on that first reading you would write some questions down about things that you are being exposed to for the first time, and then close the book and go look at your questions and try to answer them, you would learn far more than reading it 3 times. So e-learning can be constructed this way, realizing that just repeated exposure to content is wasting time. And getting people to summarize what they've read, answer questions about what they've read, try to apply the knowledge they've read, all of those are far more effective.
Yeah. And we learned that. I often use the excuse of the Big Pancake. So my family, when it's your birthday, you get the Big Pancake. So we wake up, we make pancakes, you get the really big one. It's my wife's birthday, I go in, there's no Bisquick. I don't know how to make a pancake from scratch, right? So I go online, I look it up, I got a menu or a recipe, I got a YouTube article or a video, and now I got the Big Pancake and she gets the Big Pancake. I said, well, did I really learn anything? And Christopher turned to me and goes, what's the ingredients of pancake? And I just listed them right away. I'm like, okay, I guess I did learn, didn't I? Before it's taught leads to better learning.
My favorite one. My favorite one. Because when I hire instructional designers, they do what so many people do in the field. It's just sort of an intuitive thing to do, and that's that I want to give people a chance to practice and perform in my training, so the first thing I do is show them and tell them how to do it, right? and then I give them a chance. All of that seems logical. It turns out that it's not nearly as effective as challenging them to do something right away, up front, before you've told learners how to do it. And then if they have trouble with it, you can reveal the task or the methodology in feedback, in little steps, because now you're helping them perform this job or perform this task. If you put the challenge right up front, it's better than writing a set of objectives for people to read, because when they see the task that they're supposed to be able to perform, they now know what this whole thing is about, right? This is what I'm supposed to be able to do. Far more effective than relating this through behavioral objectives. And then it motivates people too, because when you're really trying to figure something out versus just retain something, you're working harder, your mind is working harder, and so the other principles come forward too. So I don't always succeed at this, because not all of our clients, our studios working with a lot of clients, not all of our clients will go along with this. They say, well, you put this up there, they're going to say, how should I know how to do that, right? Well, you have to present it properly, and you present it in a way that says, you may not know how to do this, but you might too, and I want to give you a chance to show me what you can do already, because one of the things that we know through repeated tests is that you can't teach people things they already know. Now, I know that sounds stupid, but surely we try to do it all the time, So the better thing is to let people show us what they know, show us what they can do right up front, and then build on that. Well, how do we know what they can do if we don't give them a shot at it? So force yourself. If it doesn't work, you could call me. I'll come and help. But a really smart thing to do, just in almost every case, is to put a challenge in front of people and let them try. If they have nowhere to start, give them a button that says, how do I start? Click that and say, well, the first thing you'd probably want to do is this way. So you're presenting the information you would have presented anyway, but now you're doing it in response to their request for help. It makes all the difference psychologically and from an instructional point of view. And now there's research that proves this to be the case. So.
And so historically, I've always believed that's one of the more important things, and I think you outlined it extremely well in the book. But in many ways, it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Most instructional designers are, here's a list of the objectives, here's what you're going to learn, here's some content, and now let me know if you did it. You're turning it on its head. Does that require a more sophisticated approach to media or gaming? How do you put forth that first practice challenge so that they can go through that? What kind of technique does that require?
Well, if you were going to give people the chance to perform, then it's just a resequencing. If you were just going to present information to people, then it's more of a challenge, right? Because now you need to create an environment where they're performing, you're judging their performance and giving feedback. So it's different, but we wouldn't want to see you doing just presenting information and putting a quiz at the end anyway, right? Right. We don't want to see that. Something about, yeah. Okay, so I've been one of the things that I added a lot in this edition of the guide is designing games. My notion about this is that we as instructional designers are the most effective people to extract and kill all the fun in a game. We just seem to know how to just make the fun wither away, and lots of times it isn't very effective instruction either. So, but we all know that games are pretty popular now. Everybody's thinking about them. I am too, and I wondered, is there a way of analyzing game structures and analyzing instructional content in a way that allows us to merge those two together and keep the positive assets of both? And I attended a presentation some years ago at the Guild by a professional game designer who asked us as an audience, what is the thing that makes a game good or bad? What is it, that one thing that really determines whether a game is fun, people will play it, or it's a bad game. And we couldn't guess it. We kept coming up with, challenges and animations and sounds and, leaderboards and all of the trappings you can think of. And he'd say, those are nice things, not against those things, but they won't determine your success or failure. And so finally he had to tell us. And it seemed like, what? He said, it's the rules of the game. It's the rules of the game. If a game has good rules, you'll play it. I'm going to talk about this in a session that comes up right after this somewhere at 1:15. I would talk about this quite a bit. But think of games that have lasted forever, And one that he used, which I thought was really good, was tic-tac-toe, right? Kind of the simplest game ever. But it's lasted because of the nature of its rules. They're understandable, and they give each player a responsibility, an opportunity to succeed, an opportunity to lose, and so forth. A small set of rules. So then I started wondering, can we look at instructional content as something like rules? And I think you can, actually. And so I've done a fair amount of work on that recently. I don't have time to talk about that now. But anyway, it turns out that instructional content can be written as rules, game structures can be written as rules, and now you just put them together as a superset, and you've got something pretty fantastic. From the learning research point of view, what they're showing is that if people understand the concept and the rules of how to apply them, then people can tackle problems they've never seen before. If people don't understand the underlying rules, then they need to see an instance of almost every case they're going to have to perform because they don't have any way of extracting to a new situation. It's as simple as I know how to explain it.
And so we had a presentation yesterday from Steve Baer. He's with the game agency over there. And one of the things that jumped out at me about that is with the games is the willingness that you're learning because you want to play the game. You have a willingness to learn, and therefore your ability to learn is increased in the process.
Yeah, exactly right. So we already talked a little bit about interleaving. So one of the ways to space is to use microlearning, as we talked about before. It comes and goes, doesn't it? And by the way, I should tell you, I apologize. I completely lost my voice yesterday, so I'm trying to make it work today. And we also got the wrong title posted, and the program says I'm speaking over there on that stage over there. So it's a miracle you guys are here. I really appreciate it. And that we're somehow communicating, or at least you're sitting there patiently thinking, I wonder what he said. But I'm trying to give you. So another way to interleave is just to switch topics. Now, I don't know any instructional designer that would say, no, I want to have clear focus and I want to get right through this one topic all the way and then I'll pick up another one. But actually it turns out that it's better to have little commercials stuck in there. And those could be learning other topics. They don't even have to be related. Sometimes it's best if they're not related, and you just sprinkle them through. Take one topic just a little way and say, now for something completely different, something else, and that's another way to interleave. And of course you can combine them. You can switch topics and you can take a break and say, we'll pick up more tomorrow. This is a little bit similar to the one we said that learners don't know whether they've really learned or not in many cases. We're also susceptible to illusions of what we can do. So I remember taking a class on learning to use a piece of software. It was back in my own company, Macromedia, and I was learning to use one of our other products. And I was sitting in front of somebody who had a big screen, and he was showing me, how to do it. And we all had our computers, and we were following along. And it seemed like, wow, this is easy, right? I could do all of these steps. Until the instructor said, now you all go do it on your own. And then we could hardly remember step one. Let alone 2, 3, or 4, or 5, right? And so you could create a learning experience where learners really think they're getting something out of it, and then when they go to try to do it, they find out otherwise. So getting learners to actually perform as soon as possible in your training program is so important.
this sort of opens the conversation about performance support then. So how much are you going to teach the person up front, and then when they have to actually do it, how much are you reinforcing? And obviously a lot more tools available with search and even going as far as augmented reality. How does that change the role and even the background requirements of an instructional designer to be able to think more along that paradigm instead of the typical training event?
Well, all the new technology hasn't made things a lot easier from an instructional design point of view. Some of it certainly has helped, but some of it is a lot more difficult because you have to think of how multiple delivery platforms can support each other. And it's great when we do that, but that just goes back to my argument that let's not try to just minimize the authoring time. Let's minimize the learning time. And sometimes by spending more, using multiple platforms, being in context, we can really do a good job. But the instructional designer's work takes longer. Development takes longer. Not surprisingly, if you just start teaching something with the assumption that everybody has the foundational knowledge, you might be wasting your time and their time too, right? So it's really important to find out what your learners can and can't do before you just jump in to teach. I mentioned this before too, that the best way to learn is to try to absorb something first. Hopefully it's by practice, whatever, but then to set it aside and to write notes to yourself or to elaborate or explain it to somebody else. One of the things we know as teachers is that we learn lots more than our students do when we try to teach them things, right? So one of the things you can do, just put in your program, is after the first wave of instruction that you provide, then have them explain what they've learned and demonstrate what they've learned to somebody else. It's really effective. And we also mentioned this too, making mistakes is so important. So when talking with subject matter experts to try to create a new program, I listen to instructional designers and they're almost always asking, how is this done? What's the right way? And so forth. And I almost want to start out by saying, what's the wrong way? What do people do wrong? Because I want to make sure in the learning experience I'm providing that people have lots of opportunities, if not even enticements, to make mistakes so they can see the consequences of those mistakes. I have so many anecdotal stories about each one of these, but not the time or place. Do you want to say?
Yeah. No, actually, and I think this is maybe one of the more intriguing series of slides that we have, and when you start thinking about the evolutions in technology and techniques, one that opens itself to a whole lot of ways to interpret it. So, typical instructional design strategy. Desired outcome is somebody to follow instructions. So the approach we typically take is, follow instructions, remember and follow, or perform expertly. So our traditional approach is to provide information to the learner, or provide more information, but to perform expertly, we provide even more information. So let's talk about the right way to map this.
To do it first and then come, but it's not. So I try to figure out how to simplify this so that in a fairly quick amount of time you could get the basic principles. And I decided that it does make sense to simply categorize content in terms of, do I want the learner to be able to follow my instructions? Do I want them to remember and follow those instructions without aids, that's without performance support? Or do I want them to perform as if they were expert? Okay? So I'm looking at what especially beginning designers do, and of course, to follow instructions, you have to provide the instructions, you clarify them, you explain what it's all about, why you do this or whatever, and so forth. Makes sense. But when I want them to remember those instructions and work kind of a cappella, what do people do? They
Sorry, he introduced that. Now we're on to it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. What they normally do is just provide more information and more information, right? So you saw that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
All right, so provide guided practice. So in this case, when you're going to be out there without that support, you need to be practicing without that support, right? It's not rocket science, but it's different from just presenting more information, maybe with a big bold heading at the top that says, be sure to remember this. Okay? And if we want them to perform expertly, what do? Well, we need to challenge them and simulate the consequences. It's really important that people see have an opportunity to see how bad the outcome can be if you make a mistake and how effective various solutions might be. So I presented this to a number of audiences, and I've asked people, give me feedback, give me critique. Does this really sum it up? And I've gotten some really useful feedback that kind of says, close, but not quite. And the thing that it doesn't take into account is how complex the task is or whether it's a risky task. So I had to make a little modification, but it's not too dramatic. And so if it's risky, if it's really risky, even though they're just following instructions, it's important to give them some practice on it. Just practice to make sure that they really internalized what those instructions are telling them to do, and they can perform without error. Excuse me. If we're asking them to remember and follow instructions on their own, then the practice is just really, really critical. And the more risky it is or the more complex it is, the more practice I need. But if it goes way up to a high risk, then I want to simulate those outcomes to make sure that you see or feel or hear exactly what's going to happen when you screw up, right? And so just kind of borrow from the next stage up a little bit as the risk goes up. And I think these are just fundamental instructional paradigms or strategies that I think would improve the performance of our field across the board.
Yeah. And quite possibly this is my favorite model that he has. And if you think about yourself as an operations person, all right, so you're in a company. You only have so much time. You only have so much budget. You got to figure out where the best place is to put your time. Or you outsource to a vendor like one of our organizations. Where do you invest your money? Where's the best place to hire a vendor, and how much should you invest on a particular domain? This is actually a pretty good model to figure out exactly, based on the context and the level of risk, where do I really want to invest my time? And so you start thinking also about the technologies, and if you're going around looking at virtual reality and adaptive learning and such, you're like, okay, that's really hard, it's kind of expensive. If I'm going to do it, where should I really do it? And it's that upper piece when it's really expensive. If you think about being in a healthcare arena or some sort of experimental arena where practice could be really expensive if you get it wrong, but I really want you to practice because I want you to do it right. Well, now all of a sudden, this is where you start thinking about investing your money in the learning solution that allows people to build that competency before they get to that real world. So it's by far probably my favorite model that you've come up with.
So one of the things that's really important to know is that we're never going to be satisfied with our work. And we have to live in that space, right? Because always, I think, as you get close to the end of a project, you have another idea that says, boy, this would have been better. Or I wish I had time to do this now, right? Always the case. As a good friend of mine once said, projects are never finished, they're always abandoned. So you have to go on to something else, right? Well, in truth, though, perfection is never going to be reached, because even if you had a chance to put that idea in you so desperately wish you could add, you're going to have another one after that as you're doing this, right? So it just keeps coming. There's no end to it. So we have to be realistic about the whole thing, and what we're looking for is the best payoff. And as I mentioned earlier, so many people are trying to get the best payoff way down there at the bottom. How can we minimize all that authoring time and just get something out there? To me, the most unaffordable training program is a program that doesn't work, right? If it doesn't achieve its goal, then you've really wasted all your money times all the time that people spend away from their jobs and in training and interrupted and so forth. That's really, really expensive. It's just unfortunate organizations don't account for it in a way that they have to face that number. But that's not where we want to be, obviously. As we get to a minimum threshold, we start to get increasing effectiveness up to a point where there's kind of an optimal trade-off, and we should really stop there. We should really stop there, put it out in the field, and get some feedback, because you know what? We aren't the only ones that have great ideas. And if other people take a look at it, there's a really good chance they'll have even a better idea than that thing we were so desperately desiring to put into it. So it's better to get out in the field, get that feedback, and then decide whether it would pay off to put a little more into it.
I think one of the key areas here is knowing your audience. To give you a couple examples, we did a lot of work in the pharmaceutical arena and discovered that the clinical physicians and such, they don't care about the graphics unless it's a diagram of something. They just want the text. They're used to reading clinical journals. They want the text. Let me get through it so I can move forward unless it's really relevant. We built a compliance course once for an organization. We really pushed the envelope of really great simulations and animations to personalize different scenarios and such. And certain parts of the audience, they absolutely dug that. My brother happens to work there and oversee IT and manufacturing. For his audience, they say, oh, we just go to the transcripts and read it. We don't watch all the animations. So knowing your audience also helps determine exactly how much of this investment do you want to put into it. All right, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, Dr. Allen, for joining us.